All right. Mic's on. Okay. Got our new camera rolling. Revelation chapter 8. Alright, so if you remember, you were here last Wednesday, weren't you, Matt? Or, well, I wasn't here last Wednesday. Okay. You were here the Wednesday before that anyway.
Yes.
So we jumped ahead, and I kind of did so for a reason, and I kind of get more to that at the end of that. I jumped ahead to chapter 12 after I got past the sixth seal, because when you read through this, you can sort of see where chapter 12, at least a portion of it, kind of wiggles into not necessarily in sequential order with the rest of it. And I'll kind of get into a little bit more of that at the end. And honestly, the same thing can be said about 11 as well. But I just chose not to go through 11 because honestly, 11 is probably going to be a lot bigger of a lesson. But chapter 8, we'll go ahead and let's see how many verses are there. 14, 13 verses. I'll just read each one because we're already kind of behind on time, so I'll just read each one as we go through it. So, verse 1 says, "And when he had opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of a half an hour." So, where we left off at the end of 6, I should say, when the sixth seal is broken, what happens is it says that the kings of the earth, the great men, the rich men, the chief captains, and the mighty men, every bondman, every free man, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains, fall, and the rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? So then, here we have the seventh seal, which the seventh seal is the completion. It's kind of, this is where the wrath will really take place, and the judgments will really take place inside of this seal. So notice that what's about to happen, it's no secret that this is about to be a terrible time. I mean, it's no secret that this is about to be a terrible time. So, number one, I think it's odd that it says there's silence in heaven about the space of a half hour, because we were just in front of the throne, and you would think that the throne kind of exists outside of the creation of time and space, but it says that there's a half an hour of time that lapses. That's kind of, to me, that kind of stands out as kind of, I wonder how that works, but the thing I wanted to bring out this was the silence part. The silence is in stark contrast to, if you remember in Job, because Job says a lot about the creation. If you remember in Job, chapter 38, Job has this to say about the creation. Let's see the verses 1 to 7. I'll just read verse 7. It's talking about the creation, and it says, "When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy." There's a big contrast there in the shouting and the joy of the new creation versus basically the condemnation of that creation is finally coming to its fulfillment. So you go from having this joy and the singing and the shouting to we have silence in heaven for the space of about a half an hour. I thought that was an interesting point to bring out. If you any comments you have, just
Actually, two thoughts crossed my mind, two perspectives. This half hour of silence kind of puts me in the mind of when we give a minute of silence due to a great tragedy, something terrible happened. You know, we give a moment of silence, and here we have a silence of a half hour for basically the end of creation.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting point.
But another one, and maybe I'm just speaking a little too tongue-in-cheek here, is we're about to have 7 trumpets play. And you always have a bit of silence before an orchestration starts.
Yeah.
Well, this is quite an orchestration of destruction that's about to happen.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you say that, because what you see in the next few verses, it's actually like there's like a little prelude ceremony to the 7 trumpets playing even. As we go on, I saw the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. So the 7 trumpets are kind of laid out to these 7 angels. many things going on inside the seventh seal. And the wrath of God is beginning. Now, this isn't, like I said, it's not a secret. Now, I won't read all of these things that I've written down. I've got the hiccups now. We can look at Jude. And we know that Jude prophesied, he kind of shared the prophecy of Enoch. If you just flip over to Jude, turn a couple pages there. And Enoch, also the seventh of them, Adam, prophesied of these, saying, Behold, the Lord cometh with 10,000 of his saints. And what's he coming to do? To execute judgment upon all, to convince all that are ungodly among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have ungodly committed, and of all their hard speeches, which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These are murmurers, complainers, walking after their own lusts, and their mouth speaketh great swelling words, having men's persons in admiration, because of advantage. So he talks about a great judgment coming. Enoch does, that Jude is familiar with. To bring up the book of Enoch, I'm probably going to bring that up here shortly. But if you look at Psalm, even in the Psalms, it's in there. A lot of times we don't think of Psalms as prophetical. A lot of people kind of think of them as more poetical or calming and everything. But there's definitely prophecy in Psalms. And what Psalms has a saying where it talks about here, the 96th chapter, pages are sticking together. It'd be the 13th verse. Before the Lord, for he cometh to judge the earth. He shall judge the world with righteousness and the people with his truth. Acts chapter 17, Paul says this about wrath, that it's an appointed time. Chapter 17, verse 31. Because he hath appointed a day in the which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he hath given assurance unto all men, and that he has raised him from the dead. So he's talking about this day of wrath that's coming, and then we can even look at Romans, the first chapter, that he says in the 18th verse, For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. So it's no secret that this time is coming. So I think that's kind of good to backtrack into verse 1. I think that's another reason of, like you said, it's almost like a moment of silence at the beginning, of like an event or something, when they hold a moment of silence for a memorial of somebody, whatever the situation may be. It's no secret what's about to happen. It's just about to be absolutely devastating in judgment. And the people are expecting it, as we read at the end of chapter 6. The earth dwellers are expecting it. In verse 3 it says, And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer, and there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense, which came with the prayers of the saints, ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar, and cast it into the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. The big picture here is that this angel is most likely Jesus himself. And you're like, how do you know that? Well, let's look at his actions. Let's look at what he's doing. Another angel came and stood at the altar, and it had a golden censer. And it says there was given unto him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints. So you have this angel offering the prayers of the saints before the throne. And then what's it say about the prayers of the saints? That it ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. Well, we know that Jesus is our mediator between man and God. And if you look at this and you look at kind of the meaning of what it's trying to tell you, to me it's pretty clear that this is Jesus Christ that it's talking about. And we know that ultimately the day of the Lord and the wrath belongs to him. I'll get to, let's see, I wanted to read from Isaiah, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. But then to look at verse 5, the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it into the earth, and there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. So here, verse 5, we have stark contrast to verse 1, where, before we had silence, and now it's thunderings, it's lightnings, it's earthquakes. And again, you have earthquakes in dealing with the second coming of Christ and the day of the Lord and all those things. So we see that birth pangs and earthquakes kind of run together. It's kind of interesting. When you think about earthquakes, you have a lot of tremors leading up to the big one, and birth pangs, you have a lot of small contractions leading up to the big show. What's interesting, if you think about prophecy and you think about the Old Testament, okay. How I don't know exactly how long Jesus lived, somewhere around 32, 35 years, somewhere in there. You think about all of the prophecy in the Old Testament that we look at and we see, well, this is Jesus. A lot of that was fulfilled in 35 years, roughly. An even bigger part of that was fulfilled in the last 3.5 years of his life. And an even bigger portion of that was fulfilled in the last week of his life. Very interesting to think about that and that perspective when we talk about the end days. They had all of these signs pointing to one time, and then it was fulfilled in such a small gap relatively to the amount of time that these things are talked about. If you consider from the very beginning of God saying, "I'll put enmity between thy seed and the woman's seed," to Jesus, you're talking about, what is it, roughly, is that 3,500 years maybe, somewhere in that time frame. Maybe not exact, I'd have to look at a diagram probably to know for sure, but somewhere in that time frame anyway. So, yeah, that'd be about right, 3,500 years, because I think we're in the year like 5,800, I think, or somewhere close to that, 5780, I think, in the Jewish calendar. And they count from Adam. So somewhere in that time frame anyway. So, verse 5, this whole thing that has happened here with Jesus and offering up the prayers of the saints to God, it seems to have been some type of ceremony that happened, sort of what you're talking about, a little bit of a prelude before the seven trumpets kind of put on their show. So, what's going on here exactly? We can look at Luke. In Luke chapter 4, let's think about, now that we're talking about Jesus' first coming, let's think about that a little bit. Remember when Jesus said this, and he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up for to read. And there was delivered unto him the book of the prophet Isaiah, and when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord." And then he stops. And you go to Isaiah, where he said that at, in Isaiah chapter 61. Jesus he just sort of stopped mid-sentence. I'm going to check on that camera just to check the battery, because it's new and I don't know its tendencies. Yeah, so good. So, Isaiah chapter 61. And it starts at verse 1. The Spirit of the Lord God. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach the good tidings unto the meek. He hath sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. And then he goes on to say, "And the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all that mourn." The day of vengeance to our God, to comfort all that mourn. Think about that. The Lord in a day of vengeance to comfort those that mourn. Well, why are they mourning? And there's a big interesting thing I kind of got onto thought-wise with this. Well, if we look at the obvious, what's in front of us, remember he's lifting up the prayers of the saints. Well, remember the description that we were getting in chapter 6 of those that were on the earth at the time before the rapture. It says, when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God, for the testimony which they held. And what were they crying and mourning over? They said, they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? So when we think about what Jesus is doing here, and there might be some different opinions on this, I can't help but kind of put all these things together and get on this mind track that this angel is in fact Jesus, and he's uttering up the prayers of those people that have been saying, How long, Lord, or until you have basically avenged us for our death? Because we know vengeance belongs to the Lord. We know that there's a day of vengeance, and that day of vengeance belongs to Jesus. And he came just shy in his first coming to say, I'm here for this, 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 and this. And when he comes back the second time, where's he leave it off? Where's he left off at? Well, he's left off at the day of vengeance. So we know that responsibility is up to Jesus. Where I wanted to bring that up is that's really interesting when we look at that, because this isn't really the first time I have read that, the phrase, How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? And if you remember, when I went over that a couple weeks ago, the book of Enoch says something very similar to that. And I just wanted to read from it just to kind of point out the interesting similarity, since we've already brought up Enoch in the book of Jude. But it says, and then Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel looked down from heaven and saw much blood being shed upon the earth, and lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. And they said one to another, The earth made without inhabitant cries the voice of their crying up to the gates of heaven. And now to you, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men make their suit, saying, Bring our cause before the Most High. And they said, Of the Lord of the ages, Lord of lords, God of gods, King of kings, and God of the ages. The throne of your glory stands unto all the generations of the ages. Your name holy and glorious and blessed unto all the ages. You have made all things, and have power over all things, and all things are naked and open in your sight. You see all things, and nothing can hide itself from you. You see what Azazel has done, who has taught all unrighteousness on the earth, and revealed the eternal secrets which were preserved in heaven, which men were striving to learn. And it goes on to say some different things about, I've read it before, where basically this is, the idea is that angels came down and they had mingled with the seeds of men. And when it goes on to say, They have gone to the daughters of men upon the earth, and have slept with the women, and have defiled themselves, and revealed to them all kinds of sin. And the women have borne giants, and the whole earth is thereby filled with blood and unrighteousness. And it goes on, I want to read the rest of this. Then said the Most High, the Holy and Great One, spoke and sent Uriel to the son of Lamech, and to him said, Go to Noah and tell him in my name, Hide yourself, and reveal to him that the end is approaching. The whole earth will be destroyed, and a deluge is about to come upon the whole earth, and will destroy all that is on it. And now instruct him that he may escape, and his seed may be preserved in all the generations of the world. And again the Lord said to Raphael, Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make him an opening in the desert which is in Dudael, and cast him therein, and place him under the rough, jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light. And on the day of the great judgment he will be cast into the fire. So, I read this because there's a similarity between the day of wrath and what the flood has shown us. Jesus said that it's not going to be similar to the days of Noah. He says it will be just like the days of Noah. So we know that there's got to be some things that happen that are just identical to Noah's day. So I bring all that up to show kind of a similar, almost a parallel situation where you had people being wronged and good righteous people being killed and murdered on the earth, and they're screaming up to the Lord, how long until you avenge us? And he kind of says it just a little bit, just wait a minute. And what's interesting about that is where he tells them to bind Azazel, because they attribute all of these things to Azazel, this fallen angel that has sort of taught men to sin and do all these wicked deeds. And the interesting point I wanted to bring out on that, just to kind of finish up on that thought, was in Leviticus. If you read the Interlinear Bible, and you actually read that in the Hebrew, it's Leviticus, let's see, where it talks about, what would it be, 16? Yeah, 16, chapter 10, or verse 10, chapter 16, verse 10 in Leviticus, where it talks about the two goats. In the Day of Atonement, in Yom Kippur, you have the goat, that's the sacrifice, you have your atonement, basically, with that one goat, and then you have your other goat, which is the scapegoat. You remember? The scapegoat, it says, but the goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make an atonement with him, and to let him go for a scapegoat, and let him go into the wilderness. So what's funny about that is when you read that scapegoat in the Interlinear Bible, it actually says Azazel, which is a kind of an interesting thing that a lot of people aren't familiar with, because they choose not to look at the Book of Enoch. Not that I would make a doctrinal statement out of the Book of Enoch, but in terms of helping me form opinions, understanding things, I think it's a really handy tool to use. So I wouldn't shun away from reading it. Some people shun totally away from reading it, but I wouldn't. But if you read, like, I know the NLT actually says, let the scapegoat loose to Azazel. Is another thing that some of the translations will say. But if you actually just read the raw, literal translation of it, where it says scapegoat, it actually says Azazel. It's just an interesting thing to bring up, I think. I've heard it say before that if you want to help understand the last days, a good book to read is the first book of Enoch. I gotta say, I agree in a lot of ways. Again, it's nothing I would make a doctrinal statement about, but maybe it helps to understand things a little bit better, to make a better decision on something. Kind of like, you remember the day that we went over the Nephilim, and how there's kind of two main schools of thoughts, the Sethite view, and that when the godly line of Seth went into the daughters of Cain, is kind of the thought on that. The Sethite view is what it's called in Genesis there. But a much older thought is that it was actually the angels breeding with men, or mankind, I should say, the daughters of men. So there's things like that where, when 3 or 4 of these writings that are a lot older than that viewpoint of Sethite, I might kind of tend to make them more opinion to go with that, especially when Jude quotes Enoch and says some other things that sort of hint at that, but I won't get too much more into that because we went over that on a couple months ago. So back to Revelation chapter 8. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on like a big spill like that. Once I went into the rabbit hole, I was like, yeah, and then bring up this and then bring up that, because it's just interesting, and it doesn't get a lot of light in a lot of circles. I don't think it gets enough light anyway, enough discussion. So let's see, chapter 8, verse 6. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. So here the show's getting ready to start. We've kind of had our prelude ceremony, you might say, and now the trumpets are about ready to start. And once you go through here, it really is just, we're only going to go to 13 for chapter 8, but some of it's pretty well straightforward. The first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire, mingled with blood, and there were cast upon the earth, and the third part of the trees was burned up, and the green grass was burned up. We've seen this before. Another major type of events is to look at the Exodus. You look at the Exodus in terms of, You can look at it in terms of the rapture. You can look at it in terms of God's wrath. You can look at it in terms of an antichrist with his two. If you look at basically you have the antichrist and the false prophet and Satan kind of form the unholy trinity. That some like to kind of use that term, the unholy trinity. In that same manner, where you have antichrist, false prophet, Satan, you had the two. What are their names? That gives it Timothy, I think. I can't think of their names. I just went blank on it. I had it up in my head. I went blank on it. But basically, the Pharaoh's two magicians. I cannot remember the name for anything, but. I think they're in Timothy, 2 Timothy, I think is where they're at. But, you've got his two magicians, and then you've got Pharaoh, kind of in that same aspect of each other, kind of an unholy trinity, where Pharaoh is deified. He's, and he certainly is going on the attack and enslaving the Israelites, and God rescues them. So to speak, he puts great judgments through, and they kind of survive through the judgments and are kind of rescued away at the end. But so Exodus chapter 9, I'll just kind of bring that up briefly. Exodus chapter 9. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch forth thine hand toward heaven, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, upon man and upon beast, and upon every herb of the field throughout the land. And Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire ran along upon the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. And so there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as there was none like it in all the land of Egypt, since it became a nation. And the hail smote throughout all the land of Egypt, that it was in the field both man and every beast, and the hail smote every herb of the field, and brake every tree of the field. And this is only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel was there no hail. So, we're honestly a good commentary on the book of Revelation starts clear back in Genesis. It goes through Exodus. A lot of people, they get intimidated by Revelation. They think, oh, it's too much for me to understand. But there's so much of it we've seen elsewhere in the Bible. Like I just said, if you read that, it almost reads identical in a lot of ways to what happens in the Exodus. In chapter 8, verse 8, the second angel sounded, as it were, a great mountain burning with fire, was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood. And then 9 says, the third part of the creatures which were in the sea had life, died, and the third part of the ships were destroyed. Well, it says that the sea became blood. Again, where have we've already seen that? It's kind of the same show in a different place, really.
The easiest place to remember.
Yeah.
In Egypt.
Chapter 7, verses 19 to 21. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying unto Aaron, take thy rod and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, and upon their streams, and upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so as the Lord commanded, and he lifted up the rod and smote the waters that were in the river in the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, and all the waters that were in the river turned to blood. The fish that was in the river died, the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land. Again, it's almost the same thing happening. The only thing here is I wanted to point out was it's interesting. It doesn't say which sea; it just says sea. So it could be the Mediterranean Sea specifically. I don't know. It could be just the oceans in general, worldwide. I'm not 100%. I'm not going to make a definitive statement on that. I would say it probably would be kind of the judgments are upon the world, so I would say it would kind of be a whole world reflected thing that this would happen to. It seems that possibly a meteor hits the earth. It hits the sea, is what it seems like. Is kind of what you would see that as, where it talks about a great mountain burning with fire is cast into the sea. To me, that kind of screams meteor. So that's just something. Huh?
Or an underwater volcano.
That's also true. And we know that there's to be seismic activity involved in the coming of Christ and the day of it. So we see a similar thing kind of happen in 10 and 11. The third angel sounded, and there fell a great star from heaven, burning as it were a lamp, and it fell upon the third part of the rivers. So this time we're not in the sea, we're not in the salt water, we're here in the fresh water, and upon the fountains of waters. And the name of the star is called Wormwood, and the third part of the waters became wormwood, and many died of the waters because they were bitter. So we sort of have the same thing kind of go on, where the waters are attacked again, and this time it's not, okay, well, that's kind of bad that it's the salt water, but at least that's not what we drink. Well, this time it's what we drink, so it's a bit bigger of a deal. And this isn't the first time, again, that God's used that judgment. If we look at, again, what he did in Exodus to their fresh water supply, but as well as if we look at Jeremiah chapter 9, what he did to Israel during their sins. Jeremiah chapter 9, verse 15. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will feed them, even this people, with wormwood, and give them water of gall to drink. And he says, I will scatter them among the heathen. And it goes on to say some other things. I don't want to get sidetracked there, but again, it's nothing that we haven't seen before. You can look to so much of the book of Revelation, and all you have to do is keep looking somewhere else in the Bible, and a lot of it's just right there in plain sight, and we've never realized it, or we weren't paying attention, or like I said, we were just too intimidated by the book of Revelation to look at it. But like I've said many times before, apocalypse is an unveiling. The more the curtain goes up, the more you understand. So, and likewise, where 50 years ago, there's still a lot of gray area that a lot of people wouldn't understand. Maybe we're coming to better understanding now because we're just getting closer to the time, and realistically speaking, if it's an unveiling and the curtain keeps going up, the further along we go in time, we should understand more. You look at, like Martin Luther, I think, said that the book of Revelation was mostly poetry. He didn't say poetry exactly, but kind of like poetry, that didn't really even need to be studied. Was he wrong in making that statement? Well, yeah, he was wrong in making that statement, but he could have done so ignorantly because they were so far off from, they didn't realize it, you know what I mean? They were so far off from the book of Revelation that they didn't realize the importance of it. Imagine being alive in around 1500s, 1600s, and then somebody tells you there's going to be a modern state of Israel, there's going to be a reconfederation of the European nations. You would have probably laughed at them in a lot of ways. So there's a lot that we have, I guess, maybe to look at and to kind of reference in our thinking and our study that they didn't have. So, while I try not to be super critical of statements like that, it can only be obvious, the further we go and the more the curtain's lifted up, the more we should understand and study. To close it out, the fourth angel sounded, this is verse 12, the fourth angel sounded, and the third part of the sun was smitten, and the third part of the moon, and the third part of the stars, so as the third part of them was darkened, and the day shone not for a third part of it, and the night likewise. And here's where I really wanted to kind of dive into some thought here. And I beheld and heard an angel flying through the midst of heaven, saying with a loud voice, Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, by reason of the other voices of the trumpets, of the three angels which are yet to sound. So, we have, you can look at, I think it's Joel kind of describes the eclipse. Jesus describes the eclipse, I believe, as well in the Olivet Discourse. And the book of Acts describes, the sun being dark and the moon not giving its light. So yeah, with verse 12, we definitely see that being said over and over again, and we see where we're at when it comes to that. The point I wanted to bring out here was that it says, woe, woe, woe. You've got 3 woes. And in the book of Revelation, that's only in 3 other places other than the specific spot where they're referenced at. And I wanted to go through those real quick. Revelation chapter 9, verse 12. 1 woe is past, and behold, there comes 2 woes more. Revelation chapter 11, verse 14. The 2nd woe is past, behold, the 3rd woe cometh quickly. And then we get to the end of, or not the end of chapter 12, but in the middle of chapter 12, middle to end. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Well, who is to woe? It says, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the land, or the earth and the sea. The devil has come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knows that he hath but a short time. So we see those woes kind of being played out in the next few chapters. And like I said before, chapter 12 and even chapter 11 are kind of goofy because certain events of them sort of take place parallel up until you get to the point of, okay, now it's time for that woe. Now because you can certainly see chapter 12. I just probably could talk about chapter 12 100 times and not get tired of talking about chapter 12. But that's all for tonight. We went through Revelation chapter 8, and we'll pick up on chapter 9 next week. But any major thoughts?
Not really. I think one of the places where we get so intimidated and confused by the book of Revelation is because some don't take it literally enough. We're looking for parables in these things about the seas being turned to blood and wormwood and all that sort of stuff. When you can look back through the history in the Bible and see, no, these things actually happened on a smaller scale, but as a foreshadow, these things already did happen physically like that. And then, of course, if you're looking with worldly eyes, and who's to say how God will take 1/3 of the light from the sun from us? But if we see, it's just some space dust left by a meteor, we're going to those with worldly eyes are going to discount it and go, science can explain that.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, it's still happening.
Yeah. A lot of it goes to how you view the Bible, and that's kind of the sad thing with a lot. And I would say, other than your more evangelical branches of Christianity, Catholics, Lutherans, Presbyterians, a lot of them have such a different view of the Scripture altogether. Whereas, like the evangelical branches, we take the Word of God so much more literally, and a lot of it they sort of pass off as allegory. And that's unfortunate, in my opinion, anyway, that they take so much of the Bible and just pass it off for this. What that's really trying to say is just a story, Take Jonah, for instance. They say, well, Jonah, that didn't really happen to Jonah, that's just an allegory. Well, Jesus quotes that story later, and that kind of tells me that there's a little more to that story than maybe, just an allegory. So, that's just a lot on how you view the Scriptures, I guess. There's a lot of people that just view them as these were Scriptures written by men, and they're probably never going to change their mind. It's unfortunate, and we do the best we can to minister to people and keep doing what we're doing, but Noah preached for a long time, and the only people that were saved were his close relatives, his family.
And that's another place where we have to rely on God to lift the veil from our eyes, as it were, so that we understand these things. Because even if somebody came to me today and said the Bible was written by men, I couldn't deny that. Yeah, ink to paper, it was, but it was inspired by God. And it's only when that veil is lifted you realize, okay, men put the ink to paper, but the words were given to them by God. That veil has to be lifted.
Yeah, you have a lot of people that will try to, like one time, I don't know why, they were like, somebody asked me a question about the Bible and I answered it, and I don't even remember what the original question was. But he just kind of turned around, I was in college, and he turned around and looked at me so snarky, he said, you know that wasn't written all at one time by one person. And I was like, oh, it was actually about 40 different people, and it was over the course of about 1,500 years. And I think he was surprised that I knew that specifically. And then I went on to say, and you would probably be surprised if you look at it and you realize that it's written by 40 different authors, paper, ink to paper, and written over 1,500 years, how congruent and the way that it just forms together and it all makes sense. That to me alone shows you how it's not just, if you have 40 different authors writing one book, how screwed up is that book?
Exactly.
Well, it's because it wasn't 40 different authors, there was 40 different people involved, but there's only one mind, one brain involved in the writing of it.
The only way 40 different authors can even remotely be considered is it has to be a divine inspiration.
Yeah.
Just like there's nothing that really says we can't explain the miracles of God through science. That doesn't discount them. If anything, it shows that God's still following some of the natural laws that were put in place and still conducting his miracles, which is a miracle of itself.
Yeah, it's like some of the things that they think that they're like, oh, they're going to get you on, and you're not going to.
But it's all the eyes you look through.
Yeah.
I've seen it through both eyes. There was a time when I was unsaved and I saw it through the other eyes.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to cut the feed.